Reno was a man etched by the harsh realities of Lagos. He possessed a quick wit and a persuasive tongue, qualities that could have served him well in honest endeavors. However, a simmering resentment for those who seemed to possess more than him, coupled with a deep-seated aversion to the grind of legitimate work, festered within him. He saw the bustling markets, the flashy phones, and the overflowing wallets as easy pickings, a stark contrast to his own meager existence. His mind, a fertile ground for unconventional ideas, began to churn with a scheme, a way to bypass the tedious part of earning his keep. He observed the throngs of people, their moments of distraction, their inherent trust in a friendly face. It was this observation that planted the initial seed of his deceitful plan. He started experimenting in his small, dimly lit room, mixing various concoctions, driven by a dark ingenuity. He wasn't a chemist, but he possessed a rudimentary understanding of basic substances and their effects. His early trials were clumsy and ineffective, producing foul odors or nothing at all. Yet, Reno was persistent, fueled by his desire for a swift and effortless path to wealth. He spent his meager savings on different chemicals and fragrant oils, driven by a hunch that a pleasant smell could be a powerful tool for deception. He envisioned a scenario where his victims would be lulled into a state of vulnerability, their defenses lowered by an appealing scent. This wasn't just about stealing, it was about a twisted form of control, a manipulation that appealed to his warped sense of cleverness. The idea of a body spray took root, something innocuous, something people might readily accept or at least tolerate in the crowded spaces of Lagos. He imagined the ease with which he could approach individuals, offering a seemingly harmless product, only to unleash its secret, soporific power. The ethical implications of his plan were non-existent in his mind, overshadowed by the allure of quick riches and a twisted satisfaction in outsmarting others. He saw himself not as a criminal, but as someone who was simply taking what he believed he deserved from a world that had seemingly overlooked him. This warped perspective solidified his resolve, pushing him further down the path of his treacherous scheme. The initial experiments continued, the air in his small room thick with strange aromas, a testament to his relentless pursuit of the perfect, sleep-inducing fragrance. He meticulously documented his trials, noting the slightest effects of each combination, inching closer to his desired outcome. The city of Lagos, with its vibrant energy and unsuspecting populace, was unknowingly becoming the stage for Reno's unfolding deception. His focus narrowed, his world shrinking to the confines of his experiment and the burgeoning vision of his illicit success. Finally, after weeks of clandestine experimentation, Reno believed he had perfected his concoction. The resulting spray possessed a delicate floral scent, subtly sweet and seemingly harmless. He tested it cautiously on himself, a tiny spritz on his wrist. Within minutes, a wave of drowsiness washed over him, not overpowering, but enough to induce a state of languor and reduced awareness. He knew he had something potent. The next step was to test it in the real world, to gauge its effectiveness on an unsuspecting target. He chose a bustling section of the Ikeja market, a place teeming with people, where he could easily blend into the crowd and make a quick getaway. He filled several small, unlabeled bottles with his fragrant, yet treacherous, spray and tucked them into a worn satchel. Approaching his first target, a middle-aged woman engrossed in haggling over the price of vegetables, Reno adopted a friendly demeanor. He smiled warmly and held out a bottle. "Good afternoon, madam," he began, his voice smooth and persuasive. "Please, allow me to introduce my new, all-natural body spray. It has a wonderful scent of hibiscus and lavender, guaranteed to keep you feeling fresh all day." The woman, momentarily distracted from her bargaining, glanced at the bottle with mild curiosity. Reno pressed his advantage. "Just a little sample, madam. You will be amazed." He offered the bottle closer, and the woman, without suspicion, leaned in for a sniff. The sweet floral aroma filled her nostrils. It was indeed pleasant, and she offered a polite smile. Reno watched her carefully, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. He engaged her in a brief, inconsequential conversation about the weather, all the while observing the subtle changes in her demeanor. Within a few minutes, he noticed her eyelids beginning to droop slightly. Her focus seemed to waver, and her grip on her shopping bag loosened. The telltale signs were there. Seizing the opportunity, Reno continued his patter, his voice a soothing drone. As the woman's head began to nod almost imperceptibly, Reno knew his moment had arrived. With practiced ease, he subtly positioned himself closer, his eyes scanning for any onlookers. When he was sure no one was paying close attention, he gently eased her handbag from her grasp. It wasn't a violent snatch, but a smooth, almost imperceptible maneuver. Inside, he felt the familiar bulk of a phone and the soft give of a wallet. His first taste of deception was successful. A surge of adrenaline mixed with a chilling sense of triumph coursed through him. He offered a quick, insincere apology for needing to leave and melted into the throng of shoppers, the woman already succumbing to the full effects of his spray, her head resting on a nearby stall, fast asleep. He found a quiet corner to examine his loot, a decent smartphone and a wallet containing a reasonable amount of naira. It was more than he would have made in days of honest labor. The ease of it was both intoxicating and terrifying. He knew he had crossed a line, but the allure of this effortless gain was strong. He had proven his method worked, and a dangerous path now lay before him. Reno's initial success emboldened him. The fear of getting caught was still present, a nagging whisper in the back of his mind, but it was increasingly drowned out by the intoxicating ease of his newfound method. He began to refine his technique, learning from his first encounter. He realized that the key was speed and subtlety. He needed to administer the spray and extract his target's valuables before the full effects of the soporific took hold, minimizing the risk of attracting attention during the act itself. He also learned that different people reacted at varying speeds and intensities to his spray. Some succumbed almost immediately, while others took a few minutes. This required him to be more observant, to read the subtle cues of drowsiness, the drooping eyelids, the slight sway, the unfocused gaze. He started carrying a small, inconspicuous bag, designed to look like an ordinary shopping tote, where he could quickly stash his ill-gotten gains. He also varied his locations, moving between different markets, bus stops, and even busy street corners across Lagos, to avoid becoming easily recognizable in one particular area. His patter also evolved. He learned to tailor his approach to different types of people. For women, he might emphasize the floral and refreshing aspects of the spray. For men, he might focus on a more masculine or invigorating quality, even though the scent remained the same. He became adept at small talk, engaging his potential victims in brief, disarming conversations before offering the fatal sniff. He would often compliment their attire or offer a polite remark about the weather, building a fleeting sense of trust before betraying it. He also started to pay more attention to his own appearance, trying to look presentable and non-threatening, a seemingly harmless vendor offering a pleasant product. He avoided looking shifty or nervous, knowing that any hint of suspicion could deter potential targets. He practiced his movements, the swift and silent removal of phones and wallets, until it became almost second nature. He understood the importance of timing, of striking just as the victim was entering that hazy state between wakefulness and sleep. He also learned to be aware of his surroundings, constantly scanning for police presence or anyone who might be observing him too closely. He developed a sixth sense for potential danger, a heightened awareness that came from operating in the shadows. Despite his growing confidence, there were close calls. On one occasion, a man he had sprayed began to feel the effects but managed to clutch his phone tightly as he drifted off. Reno had to abandon the attempt, melting back into the crowd with a racing heart. This incident served as a stark reminder of the risks involved, but they did little to deter him from his chosen path. The lure of easy money remained too strong, and with each successful theft, his audacity grew. He was becoming more efficient, more cunning, and increasingly detached from the consequences of his actions. The faces of his victims, the loss and confusion they would experience upon waking, were mere blurs in his mind, secondary to the satisfaction of his growing stash of stolen goods. As Reno's solo ventures proved consistently successful in his twisted perception, the sheer volume of stolen items began to pose a logistical challenge. He couldn't sell the phones and other valuables quickly enough on his own without attracting suspicion. This led him to consider expanding his operations, to bring in others who could handle the distribution of the stolen goods. He approached a couple of acquaintances from his past, individuals who operated on the fringes of the law and were always looking for an easy way to make money. He carefully explained his method, demonstrating the effectiveness of his sleepy spray. Initially, they were skeptical, but when they saw it in action, witnessing a seemingly healthy individual succumb to a sudden, peaceful slumber after a mere sniff, their eyes widened with a mixture of disbelief and avarice. Reno offered them a cut of the profits in exchange for their help in selling the stolen items through their networks. He emphasized the low risk involved, highlighting the nonviolent nature of his method. He painted a picture of easy money, a steady stream of income with minimal effort. Lured by the promise of quick gains, they agreed to join him. Their roles were clearly defined. They would act as intermediaries, taking the stolen phones, jewelry, and other valuables and selling them through their contacts in different parts of Lagos. This provided Reno with a crucial layer of insulation, reducing his direct involvement in the risky business of selling stolen goods. It also allowed him to focus solely on the acquisition process, refining his technique and targeting more victims. With his new partners on board, Reno's operation became more organized and efficient. He could now target more people in a single day, knowing that the disposal of the stolen items was being handled by his associates. They would meet at prearranged locations, usually in crowded areas where they could blend in easily, to exchange the loot and the cash. This expansion also brought its own set of challenges. Reno had to learn to trust his partners, to ensure they wouldn't try to double-cross him or reveal his secret to others. He established a strict code of conduct and a system of checks and balances to minimize the risk of betrayal. However, the inherent danger of working with other criminals always loomed in the background. The increased activity of Reno's gang did not go unnoticed by some. Whispers began to circulate within certain communities about a strange phenomenon, people suddenly falling asleep in public places and waking up to find their valuables missing. These were initially dismissed as isolated incidents, perhaps attributed to heat stroke or sudden illness. But as the frequency of these occurrences increased, and the pattern of missing phones and wallets became apparent, a sense of unease began to spread. People became more wary of strangers offering unsolicited items or engaging in overly friendly conversation. The initial shock and confusion started to give way to suspicion and a growing sense of vulnerability. Reno, however, remained oblivious to the rising tide of concern, blinded by his continued success and the increasing flow of cash. He saw the sleeping figures as mere stepping stones to his own enrichment, failing to recognize the growing anger and fear that his actions were sowing across the city. His focus remained solely on perfecting his technique and maximizing his gains, confident that his clever scheme would remain undetected indefinitely. Initially, Reno had inadvertently targeted more women. Perhaps it was their perceived vulnerability or his own subconscious biases. However, as his confidence grew and the need for more loot increased to satisfy his partners and his own escalating desires, Reno began to target men as well. He realized that men often carried more valuable phones and larger amounts of cash. He adjusted his approach slightly, his opening lines becoming less focused on beauty and more on general well-being or a refreshing scent for the Lagos heat. He would approach men at bus stops, near their workplaces during lunch breaks, or even outside banks. His persuasive charm, honed through practice, proved equally effective on both genders. He learned to gauge his targets, looking for those who appeared distracted, tired, or simply less guarded. A man engrossed in his phone, a businessman rushing to a meeting, a laborer waiting for transport, all became potential victims in Reno's eyes. The risks, of course, were potentially higher when targeting men. Some might be physically stronger or more likely to react aggressively if they sense something amiss. Reno had to be even more careful, more subtle in his approach. He relied heavily on the disarming nature of his seemingly innocent product and his friendly demeanor. He avoided targeting groups of men or those who appeared particularly alert or suspicious. He also learned to make a quick assessment of his potential victim build and posture, opting for those who seemed less likely to offer resistance, even in a groggy state. Despite these added precautions, the shift towards targeting men significantly increased Reno's haul. The phones he acquired were often newer, more expensive models, and the wallet sometimes contained substantial amounts of money. This further fueled his criminal enterprise and solidified his belief in the effectiveness of his method. His partners were pleased with the increased flow of goods, and their operation continued to expand, reaching more areas of Lagos. However, this broader net also meant a greater number of victims, and consequently, a higher chance of his activities being noticed and connected. The stories of people falling asleep and being robbed became more widespread, no longer confined to specific markets or areas. The descriptions of a friendly man offering a pleasant-smelling spray began to surface in conversations and even on nascent social media platforms. While the victims themselves might have been groggy and disoriented, their accounts, pieced together, started to paint a clearer picture of Reno's modus operandi. The police, initially dealing with what seemed like isolated incidents of petty theft, began to recognize a disturbing pattern. The similarities in the victims' stories, the sudden onset of sleepiness, the faint flower scent, the presence of a friendly stranger offering a spray, started to raise alarm bells. The net was widening for the authorities as well, even as Reno's own net of deception ensnared more and more unsuspecting individuals across the bustling city. The increased number of victims, both male and female, inadvertently sowed the seeds of Reno's eventual downfall, making his activities harder to conceal and increasing the likelihood of his apprehension. The sheer audacity and frequency of Reno's crimes began to generate whispers and suspicions across Lagos. While the initial incidents were dismissed as isolated misfortunes, the growing number of people reporting sudden drowsiness and subsequent theft of their belongings started to connect the dots. Victims, recounting their experiences to family and friends, began to notice similarities in their stories: the friendly stranger, the offer of a pleasant-smelling spray, the abrupt descent into sleep. These individual accounts, initially fragmented and anecdotal, started to coalesce into a disturbing pattern. Market women shared their experiences with fellow vendors, bus commuters exchanged stories of strange sleepiness on their journeys, and even social gatherings became forums for recounting these unsettling incidents. The detail of the flower-scented spray became a recurring motif in these narratives, a peculiar element that stood out amidst the usual tales of petty crime in the city. Some victims, still groggy and confused after waking up, vaguely remembered the encounter with the friendly man and the unusual spray. Others, alerted by the stories of fellow victims, started to piece together their own hazy memories. The whispers grew louder, evolving into concerned conversations and cautious warnings. People became more wary of strangers approaching them with unsolicited offers, especially those involving pleasant-smelling substances. A climate of suspicion began to permeate interactions in public spaces. People eyed each other with a newfound caution, the inherent trust in casual encounters eroding. The stories even started to filter into local news outlets and social media platforms, albeit initially as unverified anecdotes. However, the sheer volume of these reports, coupled with the consistent details, began to attract the attention of a few investigative journalists and concerned citizens. They started to collect these fragmented accounts, looking for common threads and patterns. The description of the suspect, a seemingly friendly man, often carrying small bottles, began to emerge from these collective narratives. While the victims' memories were often hazy due to the effects of the spray, certain details like his general appearance and the distinctive flower scent kept recurring. This slowly building awareness among the public and the media was the first crack in Reno's seemingly foolproof scheme. The anonymity he had relied upon in the bustling crowds of Lagos was beginning to dissipate as his actions became the subject of growing scrutiny. The very element he had used to disarm his victims, the unusual nature of the sleepy spray, was now becoming his most identifiable characteristic. The whispers and suspicions, though not yet a formal investigation, were creating an environment where Reno's activities were becoming increasingly risky. The chances of being recognized were rising, and the general public was becoming more alert to his tactics. The unraveling had begun, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with the quiet accumulation of shared experiences and growing unease among the people of Lagos. Dele was a bright and observant 10-year-old boy who often accompanied his mother to the market. He loved the vibrant atmosphere, the colorful stalls, and the friendly banter between the traders and customers. One sunny afternoon, while waiting for his mother who was busy buying groceries, a friendly man approached him. The man had a kind smile and held up a small bottle. "Hello, young man," the man said, his voice gentle. "Would you like to smell this wonderful body spray? It smells like all the beautiful flowers in a garden." Dele, curious and trusting, leaned in for a sniff. The scent was indeed lovely, a sweet and calming aroma. He smiled at the man, who then engaged him in a brief conversation about his favorite cartoon. A few minutes later, Dele started to feel strangely heavy. His eyelids felt like they had weights on them, and the sounds of the bustling market seemed to fade into a distant hum. He felt an overwhelming urge to sit down, and the next thing he knew, everything went black. He woke up some time later, disoriented and confused, leaning against the stall. His head felt fuzzy, and he couldn't quite remember what had happened. Panic set in when he reached for his pocket and realized his brand new phone, a gift from his older brother, was gone. His small wallet, containing his allowance for the week, was also missing. Tears welled up in his eyes as the reality of the situation dawned on him. He frantically looked around for the friendly man, but he was nowhere to be seen. When his mother finally found him, she was alarmed by his pale face and teary eyes. Through his sobs, Dele recounted his encounter with the man and the strange sleepiness that had overcome him. His mother, initially concerned about his health, became increasingly worried as she listened to his story. She had heard whispers in the market about similar incidents, vague tales of people feeling suddenly unwell and losing their belongings. Now, her own son had become a victim. Later that evening, Dele was recounting his experience to his best friend, Femi, who lived in the same neighborhood. Femi listened intently, his brow furrowed with concern. "That sounds just like what happened to my Uncle Kwame last week," Femi said. "He was waiting for a bus, and a man offered him a spray to smell. He felt really sleepy and woke up without his phone and wallet." Dele's eyes widened. He hadn't realized that others had experienced something similar. Encouraged by this shared experience, Femi continued, "My uncle told us that some other people at the bus stop said the same thing had happened to them. They all remembered a man with a nice-smelling spray." A chill ran down Dele's spine. The pieces were starting to fit together. It wasn't just a random illness, it was the work of the friendly man with the flower-scented spray. The realization that he wasn't alone in his experience, though upsetting, also sparked a sense of shared injustice. He and Femi decided to talk to other kids in their neighborhood and at school, asking if they had heard similar stories. To their surprise, they found several others who had either been victims themselves or knew someone who had. A few older kids recounted feeling strangely drowsy after being offered a spray, and one girl remembered her older sister losing her phone after smelling a pleasant fragrance offered by a man in the market. The collective sharing of these experiences, initially isolated incidents, began to form a clearer picture of Reno's activities within their community. The children, in their innocent way, were inadvertently contributing to the unraveling of Reno's scheme by connecting the dots that the adults, in their confusion and embarrassment, had not fully grasped. Dele's loss, though painful, became a catalyst for the shared realization that a systematic deception was taking place, affecting not just adults but even children in their community. The whispers were starting to find a common voice, fueled by the experiences of young Dele and his friends. The increasing number of reports, no longer dismissed as isolated incidents, finally caught the serious attention of the Lagos State Police Force. Initially, the complaints were scattered across different police stations, filed as simple cases of theft. However, a sharp-eyed junior officer at one of the central stations noticed a recurring theme in several seemingly unrelated reports: the victims' descriptions of a sudden onset of drowsiness or sleepiness preceding the theft. Intrigued, he began to delve deeper into these cases, pulling up old files and cross-referencing details. He noticed the consistent mention of a friendly stranger offering a pleasant-smelling spray just before the victims fell unconscious. The details of the scent, often described as floral or sweet, were strikingly similar across multiple reports. He also noted the locations where these incidents were occurring: busy markets, crowded bus stops, and areas with high foot traffic. This suggested a deliberate pattern of targeting individuals in public spaces. The officer, Detective Inspector Musa, brought his findings to the attention of his superior, a seasoned detective named Inspector Kemi. Inspector Kemi, initially skeptical, reviewed the files and was struck by the consistency of the victims' accounts. She recognized the unusual nature of the modus operandi. Petty thieves in Lagos typically relied on snatch-and-grab tactics or pickpocketing, not a method involving incapacitating their victims with a seemingly harmless substance. This suggested a level of premeditation and a unique approach that warranted further investigation. Inspector Kemi immediately launched a formal inquiry. She assigned a team of detectives to gather more information, instructing them to revisit the victims, take detailed statements, and canvass the areas where the incidents had been reported. The detectives spoke to numerous individuals, corroborating the initial findings and uncovering even more unreported cases. Many victims, feeling embarrassed or simply attributing their sleepiness to fatigue or illness, had not initially considered the possibility of being drugged. However, when presented with the emerging pattern, their memories became clearer, and they provided crucial details about the friendly man and the distinctive scent of the spray. The police also began to analyze security footage from markets and bus terminals, hoping to catch a glimpse of the suspect. While the footage was often grainy and the crowds dense, they managed to identify a man matching the general description provided by the victims, a seemingly unassuming individual carrying a small bag and often seen engaging in brief conversations with people before they appeared to become disoriented. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together. The police realized they were dealing with a calculated and systematic operation, not just a series of random thefts. The use of a chemical substance to incapacitate victims was particularly concerning, raising the severity of the crimes beyond simple robbery. Inspector Kemi issued a citywide alert, urging the public to be cautious of strangers offering unsolicited sprays or engaging in overly friendly behavior. They also released a general description of the suspect based on the victim's accounts and the limited security footage. The investigation was now in full swing, the net slowly tightening around Reno and his unsuspecting gang. The consistent details provided by the victims, coupled with the diligent work of the police, were beginning to unravel the carefully constructed web of Reno's deception. The increased public awareness and the subtle but growing police presence in public spaces began to make Reno uneasy. He noticed more uniformed officers patrolling the markets and bus stops, and he sensed a change in the way people interacted with strangers. There was a palpable air of caution, a hesitation in accepting friendly overtures. On one particular afternoon, while attempting to target a well-dressed man near a bank in Victoria Island, Reno had a close call. As he offered his usual spiel about the refreshing body spray, the man eyed him with suspicion. "I've heard about this," the man said, his voice sharp. "Some people have been falling asleep after smelling something like that. Are you the one?" Reno's heart pounded in his chest. He forced a nervous laugh. "Oh no, sir. This is just a harmless fragrance. Perhaps you heard a bad rumor." But the man remained unconvinced, his gaze unwavering. "I think I'll pass," he said firmly, stepping away and keeping a wary eye on Reno as he walked into the bank. The encounter shook Reno. It was the first time someone had directly confronted him, indicating that the stories were indeed circulating and people were becoming aware of his tactics. He knew he had to be more careful, to adapt his approach before the police closed in. He discussed the near miss with his partners. They were equally concerned about the rising awareness. The ease with which they had been operating was clearly diminishing. They decided to change their tactics. Instead of openly approaching people in crowded areas, Reno would become more selective, targeting individuals who appeared more isolated or distracted. They also agreed to vary their locations even more frequently, moving beyond the usual markets and bus stops to less predictable areas. To further avoid detection, Reno decided to alter his appearance slightly. He started wearing different hats and sunglasses, hoping to make it harder for anyone to recognize him. He also instructed his partners to be more discreet in their dealings, avoiding any behavior that might attract unwanted attention. However, these changes were merely superficial adjustments to a fundamentally flawed operation. The core of their scheme, the use of the sleepy spray, remained their Achilles heel, a unique and easily identifiable element that continued to link the seemingly disparate incidents. The increased caution and the altered tactics only slowed down the process of their detection. They did not eliminate the growing risk of apprehension. The close call near the bank served as a stark warning, a sign that their luck was running out. The whispers had turned into warnings, and the shadows they operated in were beginning to shrink under the increasing scrutiny of both the public and the law enforcement agencies. Reno, despite his cunning, was underestimating the power of shared information and the diligence of the police. The net was still tightening, even as he tried to slip through its widening holes. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on future videos. Thanks for watching.